Networking, right? So we've been hinting at this all the way through. So why do you want to network? It's a question that I never ask because half the people in any room would say, I don't want to network at all. I don't want to do it at all. No, thank you. So I have to change the question slightly to why should you network? Because, if you're someone like me with introverted tendencies, it's a high activation barrier to say, yes, I definitely want to spend my day-to-day networking. But there is such value in doing it. And I want to sort of give you some tools and resources that hopefully make it feel more accessible and easier as you're navigating through. Your big picture networking sort of goal is to get a job. Where you are as a postdoc, right? There are no more internships and things like that. There may be a fellowship that you could explore. There may be industry postdocs that you could go into. But ultimately, you're looking for a job, be that a faculty role or otherwise. But that's a very hard sort of singular goal when it comes to networking because networking by itself doesn't give you that. But there's a whole bunch of questions that you can ask about roles that you may be interested in through your networking. And this is what makes networking more engaging and manageable and meaningful, is that you're trying to find answers to questions that you have about different career fields by exploring the network that's available to you and leveraging the lived experience of other people who are out there. Right? So again, these are just examples of the types of questions that you may not be able to find the answers to yourself online, but that someone in a role that's out there can give you that answer to. Saves you time, helps build you a connection with that person, gives you much more confidence moving forward. So when it comes to networking, again, yes, you're trying to get a job, but really we need to think about it as a sort of information gathering. Because if you only think about it as getting a job, it's like trying to get from point A to B in one big jump, and that's not going to work out very well, right? We have to sort of change the parameters here. But if we see it as information gathering first, it becomes more of a step-by-step approach to help you get from where you are right now, slowly but surely towards the goal that you're going towards by gathering this information from different people along the path that you are walking. And there are two main benefits from networking that are going to be so helpful to you. One is the information that you can gain. Two is practicing talking about yourself and advocating for yourself and showcasing your skills and experience and knowledge to different people and learning the language of different fields and industries and roles so that you can integrate that into your narrative. Being able to share about yourself confidently about the things that you know that you can do well is something that takes practice. Again, because it doesn't happen a lot in academia. People don't talk about the skills that they bring often, but that's something that you can practice through these casual conversations that are not interviews. You're not being interviewed for a job, you're just gathering information from people. So networking is just talking, but it's a strategic talking. It's knowing what questions you have first, finding people who have the answer to those questions, and then celebrating through your conversation with that person how their lived experience helps you answer your question. They feel good that their lived experience is helpful to you. You find information that can be actionable to how you apply, to what you apply to how you interview, and so forth, right? So there's so much can be gained from this process. And remember, networking is all of these things, right? It doesn't have to be this very stressful to look at. For me, a group of people in the top left-hand corner, it can be a one-on-one conversation. It can be an email that you're writing to someone or you're getting the answers to your question, right? It's what makes the most sense. It can also be a one-on-one conversation, which is really much easier to manage in terms of, the feelings that go along with that. So the stepping stone approach to information gathering sort of touches on all these things, right? Doing your own background research first. We talked about the Vault guides and those job families on Imagine PhD. For those of you who have more introverted tendencies, the online research is doing everything that you can do to avoid having a conversation, but then getting to the point where you say, I just can't find an answer to this question. And that's when you start networking. So running through this, right, deciding what's most important to answer and who has the answer, and then taking that information that you're getting from a conversation and then coming up with new questions and then connecting with new people and demonstrating that you have this new knowledge now, that's the process, right? And that's sort of what you want to follow moving forward. Now, how to do this? On LinkedIn, if you go to the University of Pennsylvania page, you can see this alumni tab here. Now, many of you are not official alumni of Penn, right? You're not getting a degree from Penn. You're here on a postdoc. But it doesn't matter because on this tool on LinkedIn, there's no gatekeeping here, right? No one is stopping you from accessing this tool. You can access this very freely because you are part of the Penn community, right? And it doesn't really matter whether you're an alum when you're reaching out to someone who is, because you just say, hey, I'm a postdoc at Penn too, right? And that's your overlap. If you click on the alumni tab here, you'll get to the about 204,000 Penn students, Penn alumni, postdocs, people who are affiliated with Penn, usually through their education. And you can search through this database on 6 bits of information. where people work, the organization, where they live, which is usually where they work, the role that they play. So if you go into academia, education or research may be the role. If you're going into other fields, those are represented there. What they say they're skilled at, what they studied, and how you're connected, right? And so these are all things that you can filter on to get to, a smaller population than that 204,000 people down to something that's much more manageable. And then you can do a keyword search on top of that, right? So you can do a single keyword search in addition to filtering on any of those things that I shared with you. So if I'm interested in people who work at Merck, GSK, Johnson & Johnson, the FDA, and AbbVie, and I use the keyword postdoc to sort of narrow that down, I get to 90 people who are either postdocs right now or were postdocs, right? So in this one, Daniel and Carolina are both postdocs in industry settings. Everyone else seems to be, a scientist, a director level in biopharma, because that's what I selected as my industries. So if we take Jamie here, she's a scientific director at GSK. If I look at her educational background, she was a postdoc, and then an investigator, a scientific leader, and a scientific director. She's been at GSK for 10 years. She has extensive knowledge of the experience of navigating the industry background, right? Now, it turns out she's also a PhD from Penn. That doesn't really matter, right? Just because they are also an alum doesn't change anything. But if you look through that list of people, here is Christopher, who was a postdoc, but was not a graduate from Penn in any way, right? Now a senior principal scientist at Johnson & Johnson. A shout out to Christopher because he has a dog in his picture, which as an animal behaviorist, I'm always a big fan of. Trey here, again, was a postdoc only, so got their PhD at the University of Kansas. Interestingly, Trey had a stint as a visiting assistant professor at Haverford before finding the investigator role at GSK. So that might be a question that you could ask Trey about his experience. These are people who have answers to some of the questions that you might have and might be looking for. And they're all part of this network that you share, right? And so that's some of the benefit of this tool, is that just because you're a postdoc or not an alum doesn't matter, right? You can still find people who share a similar background to you, who might have answers to the questions that you have. What you're trying to do when you reach out to these people is have, as I mentioned before, this informational interview, these low-stress, one-on-one conversations where you're asking questions about that person's lived experience to give you information that then you can use to be a better candidate for whatever that might be. And you can do this with faculty members. People in their first few years of a tenure track role, you can reach out to them and ask them about their experiences too, so that you can understand what's going to be coming if you apply for faculty roles, or better position yourself given their experience that they have in their first 3 years as an assistant professor. Now, there's lots of questions that you can ask about someone's lived experience. These are just examples of the types of questions that might be helpful, right? Especially if you're applying for roles in different types of industries, right? You might ask someone, what are the skills that are most valuable in your role, right? What skills do you use to be most successful? Because those are the skills that you either need to gain as a postdoc or talk about in your resume or your interview to demonstrate that you would bring value if you applied for a similar role, right? So much great information you can get from people in these conversations that you might be having. What are some of the experiences that you gained before taking this role that were helpful? And I want to flag that one because we're going to move into that concept in a second in terms of what can you be doing as a postdoc that's also going to support your narrative that you bring value to a role. So why network? Because it saves you a lot of time ultimately. Yes, you can do your online research, but sometimes a conversation with someone who has years of experience in a field is going to help you answer those questions much more quickly in a very relevant way. Why network? Because you're practicing advocating for yourself. Because it's a really great way of talking about the things that you do well and talking about that in the right way, using the language that people in their fields are using and different industries are using. Because when you learn things about industries or roles or organizations, you can take that information and integrate it into your narrative on LinkedIn, on your resume as part of your interviewing and so forth.